Hello and welcome. This is Fireworks. Undoubtedly, there are real threats to food security in Nigeria, but at every turn, the federal government provides assurance that its investment in agriculture will take time to mature. But rarely, to what extent is government walking the talk? Today, we'll be putting these questions through to who should know. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo. Here's an idea of who I'll be talking to today. Thank you for your time today on Fireworks. Our guest is the Honorable Minister for Agriculture in Nigeria, Chief Audu Ogbeh. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you for honoring our invitation on Fireworks. Let's start with the federal government's launch of the policy framework for agriculture. How's that faring?
The framework is working. We are following the guidelines step by step. We started off promising Nigerians that our first target was to stabilize our staples production, mainly grains and tubers. In that regard, in just 2 years, from November 17th, 2015 to now, we are almost achieving self-sufficiency in rice production. And rice is the most expensive food item we're bringing into this country, along with wheat. At a point in our history, we were spending $5 million a day importing rice. By the end of this year, we will stop rice importation, or there will be no need to import any more rice, whether through the ports or even through the smugglers' routes, because local rice is better and will be cheaper than foreign rice. Now, in terms of other grains, we've had problems with maize because there was a disease in the maize farms called the armyworm, which we're tackling. We're also dealing with sorghum and other commodities which we have almost achieved self-sufficiency in. Millet, sorghum, soybeans and maize are in a bit of a shortfall because of these disease problems. Besides that, nobody in Nigeria can say that there's a shortfall of yams or cassava. What there is in the market is high prices. And we're very concerned about the prices. And we find that these prices are high prices are caused by transportation issues and other issues like illegal tolls on the highways. We have removed as many of them as we can, but we're now considering using the railway system to move bulk goods from areas of production to areas of high demand like Lagos and some of the southern states. Otherwise, we're really in no danger of running out of food. We are definitely not Venezuela.
You talk about removing the illegal tolls. Yes. What concrete action have you done to
we
remove
wrote
those
to state
illegal
governors,
tolls?
wrote to the IG, and in fairness to them, they've cleared a lot of them. Otherwise, every local government would put barriers across the highway, telling you to pay tax.
But food consumers are not seeing that. For instance, the international price band of yam, which you just recently began to export, is 256 naira. But in places of high demand that you talk about, the price of a tuber of yam realistically is 500 naira, between 500 and 600 naira.
Yes, because of transport costs, over and above the illegal toll gates you have on the highways. We also have problems of truck drivers, trailer drivers telling you about what they suffer as a result of bad roads. They lose tires, they break down. Most of these trucks are very, very old. I was in Ekiti not too long ago and I saw a tuber of yam which weighed about 3.5 kilograms selling for 300 naira. The same tuber in Lagos is 1,500. And then you ask yourself, how is this? Why should there be such a markup? And there's no single person who can explain to you why. But there's also the problem in Nigeria of extortion. We are a bit pitiless with each other when it comes to making money as a people. And there's a certain limit to how much government can impose certain things. If you try price control, you'll fail. If you leave it free, you'll be in trouble with the people because the people are suffering.
But there was a time in this country that price control was effective. Why are you pessimistic about it failing?
It's extremely difficult. Price control when we had the essential commodities system under the Buhari Idi Agbon regime in the military era, it worked because they were dealing with essentially imported commodities like sugar, milk, and the like. When it comes to local commodities, you can't. Because if you're moving yams from Benue to Lagos, and you have to go through 17 checkpoints, and each of them is demanding money, and the truck driver is telling you that his truck is breaking down, and he thought he'll go there in 2 days and come back, he spends a week and a half, then you have difficulties telling the buyer or the seller how much to sell his yam, because he tells you, when I took the yam there, on the way, this is what I experienced. We have no capacity to preserve yams. In Ekiti, we're building a yam preservation center, which was abandoned years ago. We're trying to revive it now, to keep yams at least for 1 year at controlled temperatures. We don't have them here. So by the end of season, the yams are rotting away, new yams are coming up. And the old yams are still sometimes better than the new ones until they mature a little more. So these problems create challenges for us in agriculture. But rice, for instance, is not going to be the same. The price of rice will drop appreciably before the end of this year.
You talked about storage facility. I'd like us to look at that sufficiently, perhaps pick 1 or 2 crops. But let's look at your meeting with the Civil Defense Corps to guard investment in agriculture not too long ago. If that has yielded any visible result, coupled with the letters you said you wrote to state government.
The breakdown on the way. Many of the rail lines have been washed, and they are reviving them very slowly. So we are considering moving bulk quantities of food using those tracks to centers of heavy consumption. We think we can achieve that and bring down prices. But then we find we don't have enough wagons. We don't have enough locomotives. The few we have break down. The last time we moved cows from the north to Lagos, they got there safely. Only 2 cows died out of about 500. But the engine broke down halfway. Again, because over the years, a lot of these infrastructure facilities were allowed to rot away. We just didn't pay attention.
So is your government prioritizing spending when it puts in less than 10% of the budget, the 2017 budget, into agriculture?
The 10% issue, the Maputo Declaration, is very famous. But let me ask you, a country that spends 92%, before we arrive, 92% of its budget on recurrent overhead and debt servicing, has only 8% left for highways, for agriculture, for health, for defense, and education. 8%. So if you divide 8% by just 4 or 5 of these ministries I've named, there's no way any one of them can get 10%. The first
so what case are you making at the Federal Executive Council?
I'm making my case because agriculture on its own can't survive without a good railway network, without power supply, without good highways. So if you demand 10% and the rest get nothing, you can produce, your goods can't get to the market. So what government has first done is to reduce overhead and recurrent expenditure to 70%, leaving 30%.
Before exiting the point of prioritizing government spending, what can you realistically do with the 102 billion naira, less than 10% of the budget, to build silos, storage facilities for food crops like yam that you talked about earlier on, like tomatoes? About 70%, if the figures don't fail me, of the tomato food crops grown in Nigeria, the largest grower of tomatoes, by the way, go to waste. So what can you do with 102 billion naira? It's very small money, to be honest with you, and in fact, you don't even get all of it, because by the end of a year, you find that the Treasury hasn't all the money it promised to give you. Most of the local tomatoes have very thin fleshes. In fact, they have plenty of fiber. The seeds of tomatoes we're bringing now from Spain and Portugal are very fleshy and can survive long, and very little water content. What is government doing about that pest that's ravaging tomatoes and leads to the increase in the price of tomatoes? We've dealt with the tutor to a large extent. What we have now is the armyworm harassing the corn farm, even rice fields. These diseases keep coming. There's no way of stopping them in agriculture. Are the farmers equipped to battle this pest? We've just found the right chemical
produced by a Nigerian professor of chemistry. And it's
how
organic.
Accessible is it? Available is, and affordable it is to farmers?
Very cheap. We've done the tests and we're now propagating them. But you see, the problem with agric is you don't just pick any chemical and spray. You may be poisoning the consumers. So this has to be tested in labs and found to be safe before you apply.
But manufacturers of tomato paste would rather go to countries like Ghana to manufacture the tomato paste and then bring it here to Nigeria to sell because of the government policy that they describe as inconsistent and doesn't make the manufacturing of tomato concentrates, the raw material for tomato paste, a profitable venture for them.
The truth is that they were not manufacturing anything in Ghana. They were bringing concentrates from China and India, packaging in Ghana and shipping here, and taking advantage of the free trade thing between West African countries. Ghana doesn't grow enough tomatoes to process and send to us. The problem here are the limitations we have. Over the years, why didn't we have a developed railway system to move goods? The farmers grow and lose their products. The prices on the farms are low. The manufacturers here also will tell you that, some of these things we did before sounded very, very brilliant. Free trade. Free trade wasn't as free as it looked. Some of us were asking, we're not economists, unfortunately, what of fair trade? People have taken Nigeria hostage. Quote me correctly. They've taken this country hostage, dumping everything from our side.
But a 100% increase on the tariff on tomato concentrate, is it the solution to the answer? It's a stifling business environment.
Oh, no. Because as long as you allow them to dump the concentrate, in economies where government subsidizes export of some of these commodities, and they take control of the market, also discovering that there are certain elements they are putting in the tomato to make it look red, which is harmful to you and I. A lot of what we import is harmful. And there are those who send things to us not caring how bad they are because they're sending these things to Africa. I'm sorry, I'm talking like they're talking some degree of racism. People do. They poison, they inject chicken with formaldehyde to make it look fresh. They pump water to make it look fluffy and big. It looks so attractive. Formaldehyde is for preserving dead bodies. Why do you put it in chicken going to Africa? Because, well, it's Africa. Don't forget, and people should never forget history. 20 million of us were sent abroad as slaves into this country.
I'd like to know how enduring that price guideline that you talk about, especially beyond, the administration of the All Progressives Congress, to make it affordable and realistic for consumers. But that will be after the break. You're watching Fireworks. I have been talking with the Honorable Minister for Agriculture, Chief Audu Ogbeh. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more. Thank you for staying tuned to Fireworks. In the last half hour or more, we have been talking with the Honorable Minister for Agriculture, Chief Audu Ogbeh, and we've been looking at issues regarding policy implementation, especially for food crop cultivation and price regulation and control, which is where we're headed before we exit to other issues. That agreement that you talked about, signing with the farmers to regulate price, beyond this administration, how enduring will it be?
The central issue is about educating the farmer to recognize that if he gets too greedy, he will lose his market.
Now, Honorable Minister, you have argued extensively that the importation of good grass will help resolve the farmer-cattle herdsmen conflict, which is rampaging across Nigeria. Articulate this position for the benefit of this platform.
Well, first of all, let's agree on something, that this thing about Fulani herdsmen walking around grazing has to come to an end. It's no longer sustainable. There are those who argue that it's their culture. There is no such culture that cannot be stopped. After all, we were killing twins in Africa before, in Nigeria, thinking that twins were evil. We had to stop. It took the white man to tell us, Mary Slessor, that, hey, you don't kill twins. They're not evil. They're natural. Now, people tell you, oh, no, it's the herdsman culture. It is not. What the herdsman wants is grass and water. If you have them, he will not roam. Two, the bulk of these herdsmen walking across, getting into fights with farmers and killing people, are from West African countries. Some Chad, Niger, even as far away sometimes as Senegal. The climate change impact is there. Once the rain stops, there's no grass in the area, they start moving. And they arrive sometimes with 1,000 cows, 2,000 cows. And then they're carrying AK-47s and machetes. Now, we can't afford that.
And by the way, they're roaming the streets of Abuja,
everywhere,
metropolis. They're on the highways.
Yes. Everywhere
in the capital, in the federal capital.
Yeah, now, let me also tell you why. Abuja was a cattle route 60, 70 years ago. Cows moving from the northwest passed through here, heading through the north central, heading for the southeast, and even across the borders here to the Cameroon and Central Africa. It's been a route for hundreds of years. So they keep wandering around, and that's something that the administration is talking to the FCT minister to stop immediately, because when El Rufai was here, he stopped them.
If I may speak the minds of some of your critics, Honorable Minister, do you agree that some of these cattle rearers, the cattle rearers, are entrepreneurs? They're private businessmen, if I may borrow that word. You agree? Mm-hmm. Then why government intervention?
Why government intervention?
For private businessmen.
Why government intervention in cassava? Why government intervention in rice? Why government intervention in tomatoes? Why government intervention in yams? We've intervened in every sector except cattle rearing. And people talk as if they don't eat meat. They do. As one sector we forgot to deal with, that's why we're in this crisis. So when I'm now talking of...
Why not engage with the Miyetti Allah and the cattle associations on training for the cattle rearers?
I have met with them. The problem is, on their own, they can't do much. Just like on their own, the yam farmers have needed help from us. The cassava farmer had to be helped at a time when we had the mealybug infestation that nearly wiped out cassava growing. The man growing soybeans has needed help from IITA or our research institute. We've helped every sector except the livestock sector, very little. The goat rearer, the pig rearer, the sheep rearer, we've never connected with them because we think, well, they are on their own. Suddenly, a crisis is emerging, and people are saying, what's your business? Now, if we do create these cattle colonies, the herdsmen pay. They pay a tax called Jangali, which has stopped because nobody has asked them.
The contents of the Grazing Reserve Bill makes you have a second thought.
No,
and it makes, the critics of this administration re-echo the thought that because the president himself is a cattle rearer and he's, one of the kinsmen of the cattle rearers in the country, the administration hence is favorably disposed towards them.
Who put the bill there? Not government. It was initiated by a member of the House. We have not...
Of the federal government?
No,
federal government.
An independent member can put a bill tomorrow saying women should not be found in workplaces. Would that be blamed on Buhari? People jump to conclusions because sentiments and to some extent hate rules the waves in this country now. We don't support that bill of saying that they can go anywhere and seize anybody's land is wrong. You can't. If state governments volunteer land, fine. If they say no, fine. We have no right or intention of seizing anybody's land. And saying that is because Buhari is a Fulani man and his countrymen, a lot of these sentiments simply go on. Like the thing that happened in Anambra a few days ago. Somebody insists they should blame Fulanis.
Now, the Cassava Bread Fund, Honorable Minister, the Association of Cassava Flour Processors, they are at the verge, at the last check that I made, of declaring the Cassava Bread Initiative a failure because out of 200 processors, less than a quarter of that number access the Cassava Bread Fund due to the non-release of funds at the time that it required. And they say that they have engaged with you at different levels. Still, there is nothing concrete that has come out that may be a ray of hope for them to return to the business of flour processing.
Well, ask some of them why they sold some of their equipment which we gave them. Only one of them took the loan and repaid. I called the Bank of Industry that's handling the funds. I've met with them. The program stopped quite a while back when they said that including 20% cassava flour in the bread didn't allow the bread to rise. So they needed something called bake shaw, which we don't make here. We're trying to import some now to give them and carry out an experiment and then compel the manufacturers to produce bakeshore here. Otherwise, many of them...
But to answer your question, many of them stopped getting or hardly ever got orders from the flour millers, orders for the production of cassava flour.
Yeah.
So when there is no business, how do they retain?
Precisely that, because we didn't pass the law compelling the millers and the flour mills to use 20% cassava. That bill is on its way to the National Assembly.
But they also say that the flour millers are working against their interests because they have, wheat farms in Europe where they import flours from.
Absolutely. That ties up with the point I made earlier that foreign interests have taken your country hostage. They are very powerful. Fighting them is not easy. Deceived by...
Back to cassava flour. Are you engaging with the Association of Flour Millers?
I'm engaging...
beyond, in the absence of the legislation, but are you engaging with them, to the extent that you're encouraging them to patronize cassava flour in the interest of local content?
Now, how can they patronize cassava flour when the flour millers are not willing to touch it? How can they patronize it when the bakeshore is not available and they say their bread is is not rising enough to put it in the market? So, infrastructure, the financial infrastructure.
But at the flag of the Cassava Bread Fund, stakeholders in agriculture said it was a success to the extent that they ate cassava bread and couldn't tell the difference between cassava bread and wheat bread.
There's no difference.
Indeed, cassava bread was eaten in Aso Villa.
Yeah. There's no difference in taste. But then the same millers came forward, bakers came and said, it's a problem, it doesn't rise.
Isn't it a conspiracy? Because the cassava flour processors also say that the bill that was before the National Assembly at that time was thrown out due to the conspiracy of the wheat millers who sponsored a lawmaker to talk about the poisonous content of cassava, which they say is not true, by the way.
It's not true because he was talking of what they call hydrogen cyanide in cassava leaf. Not true, because the new varieties of cassava we're planting in Nigeria don't contain cyanide, right? Number two, the bakers themselves who are complaining now are the ones who are saying that their bread doesn't rise until they have bakeshore. We're trying to bring that in to help them do it. Then we'll pass the law. I can assure you that no matter how strong their lobby is, we'll get National Assembly people to realize that the survival of their own countryside, the electorate, those who vote for them, is more important than the lobby from anybody. But people do lobby.
So how do cassava flour processors pay back loans when they didn't get orders from the millers?
Exactly.
So what are they paying?
Get the bill through, get the bakeshore flour in, give it to them. Once they begin to make bread and they are satisfied that the bread is of the right size and is marketable, we'll deal with the rest. And if you don't deal with them, because BOI is the one handling this money, we didn't keep it in the ministry. We'll sit down with BOI. We're even encouraging BOI to write off some of the debts.
So are you aware that the failure of this bread fund also had a ricochet effect on another aspect of the industry of cassava bread? I'm talking about the flash dryers, which were manufactured here in Nigeria. And some of the cassava flour processors tell me that at that time they were getting import orders from neighboring African countries. But now all of that has gone to waste. There are about 2 industries where they manufacture flash dryers here that are not working at the moment.
I know them.
How concerned are you about this?
I'm concerned about them because I've met with the manufacturers. I've talked with Firo. There's a young man called Niji who manufactures very good machines. I know what pain the farmers are going through. I'm involved. I'm one of them. We're looking at other uses of cassava too, ethanol. We spend 450 million naira per annum importing ethanol, right? The Chinese are looking for industrial starch. We're reviving the textile industry. Without starch, you can't produce textiles. A lot of things have gone wrong. We're coming back to them, and these things are not cheap. The flash dryer is stainless steel, food-grade stainless steel, very expensive. Even to get credit to buy these machines and install, it's not cheap.
So as Minister of Agriculture, what intervention are you, brokering to help the stakeholders in this industry? And in addition to that, in the spirit of accountability, the tariff on wheat was increased at that time, to raise fund, for the industry. But is the Bank of Industry is not declaring how much has accrued to the industry from that time, during the time of President Jonathan, up until now. So how much has accrued to the industry as a result of the increase in wheat tariff on wheat?
The money that accrues doesn't go to the Bank of Industry. The money accrues to the Ministry of Finance. These levies, rice, wheat, and so on. Occasionally, government also uses them when they're under pressure.
Well, can you tell us how much has accrued?
I do not know what is there now because it's never static. It keeps moving. People use, more comes in. Sometimes we ask for funds from there. We get approval from the president to do certain things.
Before we go, again, your efforts to strengthen the Naira with yam export. Your critics say that you ought to have looked at the option of converting yam to pharmaceutical products. What's your response?
I laughed. I saw one pharmacist on TV. First, nothing stops him setting up a factory. And I encouraged him to do so. Then he realized that it costs $2 million to set up a viable food-grade yam flour factory. 2 million, something sizable and economically viable. $2 million is a heap of cash. Let him try borrowing that money from a bank at 30, 35%. Buy his generators, set up his factory, organize yam farmers to produce for him, and there are 60 varieties of rice, of yams, by the way, in Nigeria
not to talk of epileptic power supply.
Precisely.
And, high
interest rates and all sorts of charges
and all of that.
And local taxes.
But when you point a finger at him, 4 points back at you, Honorable Minister, or your government.
Why?
The stifling business environment is under your administration. So what's your administration doing about it? Or what are you as Minister for Agriculture, what case are you making to make the business environment conducive for farmers or those who want to go into processing of agricultural food?
I'm going into that. What do? Now we decide to import machinery and support farmers, small scale, not very expensive one, to encourage them to produce. Because I have always been of the theory that what they call infant industry is what we must begin to implant in this country. Bring machines and help young people start. They have dreams and ideas. With the current interest rate, which I have fought and complained about for 30 years and more, this country is not growing. It can't grow. There's always the monetary policy thing about, oh, interest rates must be high to prevent excess liquidity and therefore keep inflation down and stop too much Naira pursuing the dollar. I don't believe in that.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Borrowing the words of the Honorable Minister for Agriculture, time and interest are key to righting many of the wrongs in the sector. Join us again, same time next week when we'll bring you another incisive edition of the program, Fireworks. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo. Bye for now. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Thank you.